In case you thought I forgot about the other scene boxes where I didn't build a commander deck, I didn't. Just Ixalan kind of took over my time. But today we're coming back around to these for Gandalf and his scene box, so let's take a look. The third of the scene boxes, this is Gandalf of the Secret Fire. For one, a blue, a red, and a white, you get an Avatar Wizard 3/4 that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand during an opponent's turn, exile that card and put 3 time counters on it instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves. Then the exile card, if it doesn't have suspend, gains suspend. That's a lot of text to say basically you're going to get double dips on all of your instants and sorceries that you cast on your opponent's turn as long as they came from your hand, because you'll get the initial cast and resolve, and then it goes into exile, and then you get to do it again for free a few turns later once that last time counter comes off. So that led me to build this deck in a way I'm not used to building. This is a spell slinger deck for the most part, and it has ways of generating the advantage of instants on your opponent's turn and ways of granting our sorceries flash. And so we're going to have ways of casting sorceries as well. There's not a ton here, but there's enough to work with. So from the scene box, what else are we including here? Well, we have Aloran's Searing Light to make each of our opponents exile a creature with the greatest power they have. We're also going to include Ramus Icor, Ancient Shield. Now, we really don't care so much about the 0/3 walls or the whole thing giving the defenders exalted. What we care about is that draw. The 0/3 walls are nice and allows us to create defenders, but the card draw is really the reason why I like this in the deck. Then there's Fell Beast Shriek, so we can add this to any of our instants as we're casting. We can splice this on the back of, and we can start tapping and goading our opponent's creatures. So if they have something really threatening and they're looking your way, you can be like, yeah, nope, we're gonna just go ahead and splice this onto a card draw spell or whatever, and tap that down, and it gets to go somewhere else later. And then the last card I'm including from the scene box is Courageous Resolve, just as a way to protect our creatures. And I like it because it fits in the deck really well as the instant speed that we could double cast. So the nice part here is you could cast this on an opponent's turn as they're trying to blow up your creatures with like burn or whatever, or a direct removal spell. And then you can turn around and at the beginning of your upkeep on that third time counter coming off of it, you can then recast it, give your one of your creatures protection, and just free swing with it. So it's kind of nice. So let's take a look at the instants that I've included in this deck. Now I'm not going to go every single card in the deck, but I am going to talk about some of the more important ones and things that have like multi modes and things like that going on. So first up is Boros Charm. Red white, you choose one of the modes, either blast a player in the face or a planeswalker for 4 damage. You can go ahead and make your stuff indestructible until end of turn, or target creature gains double strike. Now, the first 2 modes are the ones that are the most important because you can either use this as a protection spell on your opponent's turn, and then you get to use it again later. You can just shoot somebody in the face for 4, and then turn around and then do it again, getting a double dip out of that. You're not really going to use the double strike part because it's just target creature gains double strike, and there's nothing really big in this deck that's worth giving that to. I'm also including Big Score here because then we get the treasure tokens to help smooth our draws out and get us into the more expensive stuff, and getting to be able to double dip on this is also quite fun. So we get to go and keep digging into our deck a little bit deeper. I'm also going to use Call the Coppercoats. Now, this one is an interesting card because we don't have a lot of creatures in the deck. There's only like a dozen creatures in the entire deck, but those creatures do various things for us, like generate other creatures, or they generate damage as we cast our other spells. So Call the Coppercoats here is going to leverage our opponent's creatures against them. The more stuff that they have, the more stuff we can get off of Call the Coppercoats. And then we can get the double dip off of it, cast this on their turn, get the creatures to use them as blockers or whatever, and then turn around and do it again a couple turns later. And that's kind of just a really good way to keep us alive and or to create an offense on the fly. I also found this interesting Chaos Warp variant in Chaos Mutation for 3, a blue and a red. It's from the Warhammer precons. Exile any number of target creatures controlled by different players. For each creature exiled this way, its controller reveals cards from the top of the library until they reveal a creature card, puts that onto the battlefield, and then puts the rest on the bottom in a random order. Now, what I like about this is they can't get like enchantments, they can't get lands, they can't get artifacts, things like that. It has to be another creature that we are flipping off the deck, and it hits multiple targets. So I can hit a creature for each of my opponents and force them out of the game. So if each of them has something really nasty, or even just their commanders, I can force them out of the game, and they can flip over, and they might just hit some like little mana dork or something like that. Now, bear in mind, this kind of thing can also get you screwed, and they flip over something even worse than what you have. So, user beware. I also wanted to include Delayed Blast Fireball. For one red, you get an instant that says it deals 2 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. If it was cast from exile, it deals 5 damage to each opponent instead and each creature they control. So the neat part here is you can do the whole foretell and cast it for 6 thing if you need to, but if you cast this on their turn, Gandalf's going to exile this with the time counters on it for us, and then it's going to come back out of exile and cast itself and just be like, okay, well, here you go. And it's going to do the 5 damage. And we don't have to pay the 6. You just pay the 3, wait 3 turns, and boom, blows up again. And it's nice because it only hits their creatures. It doesn't hit any of our stuff. So since we're creature light, I wanted a way to kind of generate threats and generate blockers and things for us. Well, let's use our opponents to do some of that with Elminster's Simulacrum. For 4 blue, you get an instant. For each opponent, you create a token that's a copy of one target creature that player controls. I've been kind of looking for a place to put this in a deck, and I thought this would be really fun because you can do this twice and gain 6 things from your opponents by doing it on their turn, exiling it with the time counters, and then casting it again a few turns later. And then the last card I want to point out, besides the rest of the deck, is Lorehold Command. For 3 red-white instant, you choose 2 modes. Create a 3/2 red and white spirit token. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and indestructible and haste until end of turn. It deals 3 damage to any target, and target player gains 3 life, or sack a permanent, draw 2 cards. Now, for the most part, the creature token's not that bad. For the most part, the 3/2 is not a big deal, and neither is the +1/+0 and indestructible and haste, unless you get a wide enough board with some of the token generators, which we're going to talk about here shortly. But the other 2 modes are really good here because we can either shoot something and gain the life from it. We can go ahead and sack a permanent and draw cards, and we're going to have token permanents that we can sack in the deck. So you're not going to be lacking for that. So there's a lot of functionality with Lorehold Command, and like I said, if you manage to get the board wide enough, even the +1/+0 indestructible haste part could come into play for finishing off an opponent. So those are the instants that I'm going to include here and the scene box cards, but what else can I do with this deck to benefit this? So let's leverage all this spell slinging we're doing with creatures and enchantments and things like that that actually benefit from us casting instants and sorceries. So let's take a look at those now. First up, we got Kaikar Wind's Fury. For 1 blue, red, white. It's a flyer that whenever you cast a non-creature spell, not just the instants and sorceries, you get a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying that has sacrifice a spirit to add red. So you can actually use this as a way to cast your stuff, get blockers, get threats in the air. There's some things that can go on there. And if you need the mana in a pinch, you can start sacrificing those spirits to get that mana as we go along. And there's plenty of non-creature spells in this deck to just keep churning out spirits for us. In the same vein, though, we also have Dika Fractal Theorist. For 4 blue, you get a 3/3. It's got Magecraft that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you create a 0/0 blue-green fractal creature with X +1/+1 counters on, where X is the mana value of the spell. Well, if you're casting some, 5, 6 mana spells, you're gonna get 5, 5, 6, 6s, that kind of stuff. And she has the ability to make a creature token unblockable for 4 mana until end of turn. So I was looking for ways to get more threats into the deck since we're kind of creature light, and this came up in my search, and I thought, wow, this is actually pretty good because we're gonna actually get to cast each of these instances and sorceries if we time our stuff right twice. So you're gonna get twice the fractals off of this. So it's a great include here. And then in the same vein that creates creatures for us, we have a couple of cards here. We have Young Pyromancer for 1 and a red. Every time you cast an instant or sorcery, create an elemental creature token. And then we have its newest variation, Third Path Iconoclast. For blue-red 2/1 human monk. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it creates a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature. So there's ways here for us to just churn out our creatures and get little 1/1s on the board to harass our opponents, or just use as blockers to keep us alive long enough for all of our spell casting to do the job. So I like having these 2 in the deck as well. Then besides the things that trigger to create creatures for us, we also have some damage dealers that trigger off of instants and sorceries and non-creature spells going off. So first off, let's stick with a nice Lord of the Rings one with Gandalf the Grey. 3 blue-red, 3/4 Avatar Wizard. Whenever an instant or sorcery spell is cast, you choose one that hasn't been chosen. You can either tap or untap a permanent. You can have him deal 3 damage to each opponent. You can copy a target instant sorcery spell that you control, and you can choose targets for the copy, or you can put Gandalf on top of its owner's library. So you can do some interesting juggling with this one. Like, you can have it deal 3 damage to each of your opponents and on like the first trigger, and you can start tapping and stuff. And then once you can kind of time it where this is going to be on the board. So as soon as that spell comes out of the time stasis, it's going to go ahead and hit the stack, and you're going to be able to copy it and choose new targets. So you're going to get basically a third use out of whatever you brought out of exile off the time counters. I'm also going to include Ral, Storm Conduit, 2 blue-red Planeswalker, +1, or excuse me, +2, it scries for 1, -2 when you cast your next instant and sorcery spell. Copy the spell and choose new targets for the copy. So this works good for our turn to copy stuff, but the big thing on here is the static ability. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, it deals 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. So with all the spells that we have in this deck, and there's like 40 of them, you're going to have plenty of opportunities to have Ral here and start pinging away at our opponents and dealing incremental damage. Also in that vein, we have Fiery Inscription from the Lord of the Rings set for 2 and a red enchantment. When it enters, it tempts you, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. And then we can't forget its buddy Gutter Snipe, which is basically the same thing. 2 and a red is a 2/2 Goblin Shaman. That same thing, instant or sorcery gets cast, deals 2 damage to each of our opponents. These are just great ways to leverage that extra spell casting we're doing to just kind of chip away and shock all of our opponents every time we do that. And the last card I'm going to include that does a similar thing is Exalted Flamer of Tznich. Probably butchering that name. For 2 blue-red, you get a 2/4 demon that says at the beginning of your upkeep, return an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard to your hand, and when you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Now, this one's a little pricier since it's from the precons, and it's actually kind of popular to use, so you don't have to use. You can do cheaper variations on things like the Erebor Flamesmith and things like that that do the 1 damage on cast. So you can decide how you want to do that, but I liked this one because it allows us to get the instant sorceries back from our graveyard to recast them and get more and more things going with that. Now, I know you're wondering why that the Gandalf actually says sorcery on your opponent's turn. Well, we have plenty of ways to give our sorceries flash, and that's what we're going to do. So let's take a look at the ways we're going to give those instant speed interaction, as well as some of the cards that we're going to be able to cast on our opponent's turn to leverage out the game. Let's return back to the Lord of the Rings set for Born Upon a Wind. For 1 in a blue, you get an instant that says you may cast spells this turn as though they had flash and draw a card. So I like this because it replaces itself, and you're able to go ahead and just keep casting afterwards and just do things like that. And so your sorcery speeds and even some of your creatures can then be just flashed in once you cast this and just keep churning into Gandalf's ability. In a similar vein, we have Complete the Circuit. For 5 in a blue, you get an instant with Convoke that says you can cast sorcery spells this turn as though they had flash, and when you cast the next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy the spell twice. You may choose new targets for the copies. So with all the token generation that we have going on in this deck for casting our other stuff, we should have plenty of things to convoke this, and we could quite possibly get this off for free, if not just for a blue, as we go along in the game. So then we get to cast the next instant sorcery, and this is instant speed. So then we go ahead and do this on our opponent's turn. Complete the Circuit will then go ahead and get exiled with Gandalf. We'll go ahead and cast our next thing. It'll get exiled, and then when the time counters come off, should be coming off simultaneously. You can either complete the circuit and double that spell again on that upkeep trigger set, or you can stack it where that other spell resolves first, complete the circuit will resolve, and then you can cast something else on your turn from your hand in order to go ahead and double that instead. There's some good counterplay here with this card. But maybe we don't want to mess with a single shot instant speed interaction. Let's go ahead and give our spells flash with the next couple of cards. First up, we have Vidalcan Orrery for colorless. You may cast spells as though they had flash, and Leyline of Anticipation, 2 blue. If it's in your opening hand, you can begin the game with it on the battlefield. Same thing, you may cast your spells as though they had flash. So these are just static ways to give our stuff flash. That means our creatures would be able to flash in, enchantments, artifacts, and sorceries, which is the big important thing with Gandalf, so then we can start exiling the sorceries and recasting them with him. And then the last way I have in the deck to give our stuff flash is Teferi Time Raveler. Now, I know a lot of people don't like this Teferi, but it does have the benefit of actually being able to protect us by bouncing their stuff, giving us cards. Or the big thing here is to +1 and make it so we can cast our sorcery spells like they had flash, and it keeps our opponents from countering our stuff, which is one of my favorite abilities on this card. So let's take a look at the sorceries in deck that these flash items would allow us to play on our opponent's turn to get the extra casts off of. First up is Gandalf's Sanction. For 1, a blue and a red, you get a sorcery, deals X damage to target creature, where X is the number of instant and sorcery cards in our graveyard. Excess damage is dealt to the controller instead. Well, we have plenty of instants and sorceries in this deck. Like I said before, there's about 40 of them. So as you're just playing the game naturally, you stumble upon this and you blast something with it, say a 1/1. You don't even have to really aim to remove something important. Aim for the littlest thing. So then all that extra damage pours over onto your opponent, and you could be doing 10, 12 damage for 3 mana and then be able to do it again because you're going to be able to flash this in on your opponent's turn and do the time counter tricks. I also decided to include Taunt from the Rampart for 3 red white. Go to all creatures your opponents control until your next turn those creatures can't block. So you can do this at instant speed with the flash stuff. Go ahead and goad their stuff and then be like, okay, go ahead and have fun beating each other up because they're going to have to swing at each other there and they can't block for that whole cycle. And then you just go ahead and you'll get to do this again on your turn with the cast, keep yourself protected again, and then just be able to swing through with your stuff that turn and just have, just have ways of just doing mad chaos with this card. Then I'm going to dip into the Doctor Who decks for a card that I thought was kind of fun to flash in. Hunted by the Family. For 5 blue, it's a sorcery. Choose up to 4 target creatures you don't control. For each of them, that creature's controller faces a villainous choice. That creature becomes a 1/1 white human and loses all abilities, or you get a token copy of it. So I can't wait to flash this in, nuke somebody's just massive threat that's causing problems, just turn it into a 1/1, or I get a copy of it on my side of the board to mess with people, and then do it again off the time counter suspension. Then I'm going to include one of my all-time favorite cards, Irenicus's Vile Duplication. For 3 and a blue, you get a sorcery that says create a token copy of a target creature you control, except for it has flying and it is not legendary if the creature is legendary. So cloning is one of my favorite things to do in Magic the Gathering, and I like being able to break that rule of the singletons by using these kind of effects, but I also love these newer clones that allow us to clone legends. So having 2 Gandalfs around to start, so having things like 2 copies of our pingers or 2 copies of just anything that really helps us wear our opponents down. I like the idea of having that and just make more and more of them, and we get to do it a couple of different times because this is a sorcery and not your traditional living clone creature. And then the last sorcery I'm going to bring up here is Asinine Antics. For 2 blue, it's a sorcery. You can cast it as though it had flash if you pay 6 for it instead of the 4. And it says, for each creature your opponents control, create a cursed roll token attached to that creature. They become 1/1s. So I think this is a way to just, slow down your opponents. Now, it's not as good against players who are on the +1/+1 counter plan, but if you're not up against that, this is still a really good card, especially if you're just doing like big dumb stuff. You're just like, okay, it's a 1/1 and it can't really do that much to me as a 1/1 versus being like, 10/10 dinosaurs and weird stuff like that. So this is kind of a fun card to have, and I like that I can actually give it flash on its own without the ley lines and the Vidalcan Orreries and that kind of stuff. So I wanted to include it here. The last segment of the video is going to be things just speed up getting these time counters off of these suspended cards. So let's start with the Doctor Who stuff here with the 10th Doctor. For 3, a blue and a red, you get a 3/5 Time Lord Doctor that says whenever you attack, exile cards from the top of your library until you hit a non-land card, put 3 time counters on it, and suspend it. And then you can pay 7 to time travel and you do 3 times, activate only as a sorcery, and time travel actually removes the time counters off of the suspended cards, so you can speed up the stuff that was suspended by the 10th Doctor, as well as the stuff that was already suspended by Gandalf by casting spells on your opponent's turns. We also have a couple other cards that have already existed in the game that does a similar thing for us, but it helps us speed up getting those time counters off. Now, how do I do that? By getting myself more upkeeps. So let's take a look at a couple cards that do just that and give us additional upkeep phases. In Paradox Haze, for 2 and a blue, enchant player, myself, at the beginning of the enchanted player's first upkeep each turn, they get an additional upkeep step after this. Time counters come off at the beginning of upkeep trigger. So you're going to get to remove 2 time counters for every time Paradox Haze goes off and triggers, granting you that additional phase. In the same spirit, we also have Sphinx of the Second Sun. It's 6 blue flyer, 6/6 Sphinx that says at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, you get an additional beginning phase after this phase. The beginning phase includes untap, upkeep, and draw steps. So this is interesting in that it allows us to go ahead and untap all of our stuff after combat. It allows us to have that extra upkeep step to remove the counters, and then we get an additional card every turn with this thing sitting around. So this is a fun card. I didn't even know this card existed until I started researching this deck, and I absolutely love that it goes with the Paradox Haze. So that's my deck for the Gandalf scene box. I call it Gandalf's Instant Coffee because we're doing all this instant speed interaction and stuff on the other side of the board. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and while you're down there, if you feel like subscribing because you like what I'm doing, feel free. It helps the channel grow. And as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.